have always been laboratories, and that is true today more than ever, maybe. The fundamental responsibility of state leaders is to keep their residents safe, and that includes electricity and heat in cold weather. To keep that commitment and grow their economies, many states are continuing to advance clean energy solutions to ensure their states have reliable, affordable electricity and heat. Frankly, they have to. Hurricanes, tornadoes, snowstorms, wildfires, etc., are hitting areas that were never at risk before. Welcome to Global Weirding. One state that has been doing innovative energy strategies for many years, sometimes quite quietly actually, is New York. Full disclosure, I am a native New Yorker myself, so I'm a little bit biased, but I've been following what they've been doing for years. But what New York is doing and how it's working and what the rest of us can learn from them is what we're going to talk about today with the woman who leads their prominent energy research and development entity. So put on your earbuds, turn up the volume, grab a pen and pad or tablet to take notes, and let's get started. Welcome to Electric Ladies Podcast. We share stories, insights, tips, and advice from remarkably innovative women working on the front lines of corporate responsibility, energy, sustainability, and climate. I'm your host, Joan Michelson. We talk about innovation, leadership, technologies, and careers, always bringing a new perspective. Find us anywhere you like to listen to podcasts on our website, electricladiespodcast.com, and through my Forbes articles as well. And please pass it on to your friends and leave us a 5-star review if you're so inclined. It helps other people find us. This episode is brought to you by Competent Boards, a comprehensive training program for board members and aspiring board members. I'm faculty there, full disclosure, and have the sustainability and ESG designation myself. But it gives you the skills, strategic perspective, and confidence, very important, needed for today's boardrooms, especially around the kinds of issues we talk about on Electric Ladies Podcast. It's great networking too, by the way. You can check it out at competentboards.com. Also, I just want to let everybody know I am producing the Earth Day Women's Summit on April 22nd in Dallas, Texas. It's part of the renowned and huge 4-day EarthX 2025 extravaganza. We have a very cool all-star lineup focused on highlighting the unique contributions that women make to the climate issue. So ping me for more information about it on LinkedIn or go to Electric Ladies Podcast and search for the summit for details if you don't see it right away. New York State is the 4th largest state in the U.S. by population. You might not know that. Clearly, it has 4 seasons, with the upstate parts of the state having very severe winters sometimes, like Buffalo, and others with less severe winters, like my hometown of New York City. The economy ranges from the financial and media sector in New York City to the more industrial and rural areas, which are also evolving, actually, as new industries grow there. It's really fascinating to see. Each person, though, and each business needs reliable, affordable electricity, and each person wants their air and water to be clean. Leading this effort to ensure that New Yorkers have reliable, affordable, and clean energy is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, also known as NYSERDA, which we will specifically talk about today, what they've been doing, how they've been innovating the transition to clean energy for, get this, 50 years. Yes, it was founded in 1975. Been on the front lines for 50 years of the global transition to clean energy. So what is NYSERDA doing and what can we learn from them? I'd like you to meet Doreen Harris, President and CEO of NYSERDA. She joined NYSERDA in 2010 as Vice President of Large-Scale Renewables, which includes kind of what it sounds like, land-based renewables and offshore wind, blah, blah, blah. You get the point. Before joining the state, Doreen spent over a decade in the private sector as well, including in engineering and management roles at Alcoa. She is an engineer, people. She serves on several boards and commissions, including the Alliance to Save Energy, whose president, Paula Glover, was, by the way, also a guest on Electric Ladies Podcast, and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network Council. She's also an ambassador for the Clean Energy Education and Empowerment Initiative, which I've been involved in over the years too, because it focuses on women in energy. Doreen earned her Bachelor's of Science degree in Chemical Engineering from the University of Rochester and her MBA at the University of Albany, State University of New York, a bona fide New York City girl, New Yorker, I should say. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Doreen Harrows to Electric Ladies Podcast. Welcome, Doreen. I'm so happy you can join us.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here, Joan. Thanks for having me and for reminding me of my true New York roots. Born and bred New Yorker.
Yeah. We have a certain kind of energy, we just really do. It's great. So to start off, let's talk about what exactly NYSERDA does and how the results of its work show up in people's lives.
Well, it's a great opportunity to reflect on just that question. As you had noted, NYSERDA is celebrating our 50th anniversary this year, 50th birthday. I don't know which I should say, but either way, it's provided us an opportunity to really look at just that fact, which is what has NYSERDA become and what impact have we had. The 1970s was obviously the energy crisis in the country and frankly globally, and that was the genesis of the formation of the authority. We were actually, you'll find this entertaining, we were reconstituted from the New York State Atomic and Space Development Authority. So we probably will be talking about splitting the atom at some point in this discussion, but all that to say, we have a few different roles that we play on behalf of the state. In the first, we are the state's energy planner. So we're responsible for really looking at the longer term needs from a broad energy system perspective of the state and helping our state be prepared for those needs well into the future. On the other hand, we do execute a number of different programs across the state, really facilitating energy efficiency, renewable energy, innovation, all economic development related to all of those things across the state. Our budget is around $2 billion a year, and we really have, over those years, put forward not only policies and programming, but also the leadership that is needed to bring forward broader market changes outside of perhaps our state, but rather the, I hope, global changes that are really part of an effective energy transition. So that's who we are. We've had an extraordinary impact over those 50 years. A lot of, I'm sure at some point we will also be talking about the federal context. I counted. We have worked under 9 different U.S. presidents in those 50 years and even more U.S. Congresses. So let's just say it's a durable institution and one that has stood the test of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So what metrics does NYSERDA use to drive its decisions around, energy policy and energy planning? Because especially when you're looking at planning, I mean, there's obviously climate change, but you have to make energy requires, obviously it's very capital intensive, so it requires huge investments many years in advance. But the economy and needs and the climate changes so rapidly. How do you do that? What are the metrics that you look at, and how do you make those decisions?
That's a fantastic question. Energy planning is always tricky business because of the fact that you have so much uncertainty with respect to what the future will hold. That's why when you see, I chair our state's energy planning board. So our state energy plan is underway. It looks forward a number of decades. So when you want uncertainty, you get it. We have uncertainty in days and weeks units, but try it over decades. Ultimately, when you see our state energy plan, what you'll see is multiple scenarios that are necessary to triangulate around at least a base case that can be planned against. But there are very significant variations in the potential futures. It's in part, of course, because of the natural variations that occur in our economy over those numbers of decades. But also, I'd say increasingly the planning has to take into account the changing climate that we're working within at the same time. And so we have many, many variables that we plan against. So we have to be okay with being imprecise with respect to the boundary conditions that we're looking at. And then we look at a few different specific metrics, though, when we think about how we are effectuating the actual actions associated with that plan. We look at cost as a major aspect of our planning. It is true that we live in a world in which affordability remains a central focus, certainly of the governors, but also of an effective energy system, right? We need it to be as cost effective as possible. One of the things that's particularly challenging about the topic of cost is that we need major investments in our energy systems no matter what we do. In many cases, we need to invest in our energy systems just from the perspective of maintenance, but also from the perspective of expansion, because every scenario that we look at shows a need for increased energy consumption and delivery, therefore, in those coming decades. So we're talking about a massive investment, long and short of it. So we need to do that as cost effectively as possible. But we also look at the benefits, and that's important as well. So when we look at health benefits, economic benefits, reliability benefits, et cetera, those need to be factored into decision making as well. And of course, one of our jobs is to advance a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions across our state. So of course, we look at how all of those greenhouse gas emissions reductions can most cost effectively be achieved, but also to bring forth the maximum benefits in doing so. So I call it, as a good engineer, I call it a multivariable equation. We're solving for many things. And it is imprecise for sure.
Well, and it has to be. And when you're innovating, it's always imprecise, right? The key to leadership is being able to manage ambiguity and uncertainty. That's why you wear the hat. That's great. And thank you for that comprehensive response. One of the things that is key to innovating energy technologies in particular, and especially now, is obviously it all has to be integrated into the grid. You talk about delivery to people,
Yeah.
right? And unless you're proliferating microgrids, I'm having Jana Gerber on head of microgrids at Schneider Electric, for example, on my summit and on the show coming up. But you have to get from there to there, right? You have to get from the power plants to people's homes and businesses. And when you're innovating new energy technologies, especially like wind and solar, et cetera, and even geothermal, whatever it is, it has to go, you have to have the grid integrated and obviously energy storage systems, right? So
Yep.
how are you upgrading the grid and how are you integrating new storage systems and frankly deciding when to do it? Because the continuum is moving. It's not, I mean, you have to do all of this without dropping a moment of service to anybody anywhere in the state, which is, you're not a restaurant that can close for a renovation, right? So how do you do that?
Well, when one talks about longer term planning, as you're asking about from the perspective of our electric grid in particular, it involves a number of different actors. So in New York, it is important to note that we have a system operator, the New York Independent System Operator, who has the responsibility of really looking at reliability in those same, multiple decades of future state that is part of their planning as well as our regulator of the electric grid, in our case, the Department of Public Service and the Public Service Commission. So I'd say that when we talk about planning, we all need to integrate our own models, our own thinking, and our own assumptions. And that's very much what we do. We've got A situation, for example, in New York, perfect example, a reliability needs assessment conducted by the New York Independent System Operator has revealed a reliability need in New York City in the coming number of years. So we have to say, of course, we interrogate their assumptions, we assess collectively various futures, and to the extent possible, come to consensus on those outcomes. All that to say, that's exactly how the system should operate, because they say we have a reliability need. We need solutions to address that reliability need. In an interesting turn of events, the reason the linchpin really to addressing that reliability need is a very large transmission project that is under construction now, moving hydroelectric power from Canada into New York City. It's called the Champlain Hudson Power Express project. All that to say, the NYSO has said until that project comes online, we need solutions to address a reliability need. And so as we speak, they're looking at various options to do so. So I say all of this because New York has one of the most reliable grids in the country, truly, when you look at the data, but it is because of the robust system of checks and balances and planning that happen across our state, as well as, frankly, the ways in which our grid functions as a general matter, not only from a distribution perspective, but even from an interregional perspective. We've got a lot of options to deliver power to and from our state, which serves as a benefit for reliability as well. So long and short of it is, it is a complex process, but one that has demonstrated that we can be building and maintaining reliability at the same time.
That's great. That's really good. I thank you for all that. And I really appreciate it, because people don't, they just turn on the light switch.
Yep.
And they don't, or turn on their computer, or they see when there's a blackout, but they don't really always understand what goes into it and all the different choreography that goes into it, all the different players that have to do their maybe an orchestra conductor is a better example, because everybody has to do their part at the same time for it to work, right? It's part of what makes it so fascinating. But you are definitely flying the plane while you're building it too, or changing it.
Well, certainly, that's the other thing. The changes you are effectuating can sometimes take a decade or more to realize, right? So there's extra challenge when you're building. Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, and the results of them don't show up for years in the future too. So it's not like you have an immediate experiment and you can tweak it based on what the results are immediately. But in her 2025 State of the State speech in late January, New York Governor Kathy Hochul announced a $1 billion investment to address the climate crisis. She said it was the single largest climate investment in state history. She also said it would generate thousands of jobs and cut energy bills and pollution. Tell us where that money will go and why. It says some of it goes to, I think it says some of it goes to NYSERDA, et cetera. But talk about what that investment is, if you can, and where NYSERDA fits in that piece. It sounds like it's a part of it. It goes to your planning too.
Yes, well, certainly Governor Hochul has made very clear, not only in her commitment to realizing our clean energy transition, but also to put the funding behind it to actually effectuate that transition. So I would say that, to me, is what should be taken from her State of the State address was the fact that she's prioritizing these investments. And so the commitment that she's made is as we speak being negotiated as part of the executive budget. It is her proposal within her budget is $1 billion for what is deemed the Sustainable Future Program. And that is a huge sum, truly a landmark investment and a huge down payment, I'd say, that can allow us to advance many different work streams. We're talking about every sector of our economy. So foundationally, $1 billion can be used for any one, a variety of investments. They've made clear that the governor's office has made clear that they're really looking for projects, large capital projects, to be advanced through this initiative, projects that can be really focused on infrastructure and focusing on the housing, sort of the building stock, as well as the transportation systems in our state, both of which are the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. That's always something that people are surprised by, is that buildings are actually our largest source, followed by transportation in our state. So all that to say, this is being negotiated as we speak. We will receive input from the legislature, of course, to ensure that these investments are transformative. But foundationally, at this moment, it's too soon to say who specifically would be deploying it. NYSERDA stands ready, I won't lie, but unclear exactly who will be best suited. It will depend on the nature of the investments made.
Yeah, I bet. Well, it's a model nonetheless. I mean, it's a stake in the ground. It's a big commitment. It says we're gonna walk the talk, or at least try to, right?
Yep.
That Speaking of the legislature, how do you deal with people? One of the things that I like about New York is it does have a mix of representation across the political continuum. So how do you deal with people on the political extremes who in today's world can be very loud and demanding, but that's not always where the science and the engineering leads best, right? Or they don't have all the information that you have. They don't, so you have to manage them. And in order to get, I mean, I know you're not in the state legislature or managing, but you still have to deal with the incoming from it, right? So how do you deal with people that are screaming on either side and trying to derail you one way or another? I mean, do you try to explain it to them? Do you try to reason and give them facts? I mean, do you ignore them? I mean, how do you teach us how to manage that? Because the noise can really take all of us off track, but their needs also matter, right? They also need electricity. They also need, they have a right to voice their opinion. So how do you juggle that?
Well, I'd say that this is a question that is relevant not just for the legislative interactions that we have, but the interactions with the public writ large, because it is the case. NYSERDA is founded in the framework of objectivity. Like, that is what we do, and that is what I stand for, certainly in leading this organization, is to look at these issues from an objective, clear-eyed, and credible manner perspective, and to present information as such. That's certainly, perhaps in my instance, grounded in my background from an engineering perspective, but also to really interrogate these issues so that we are clear as to what are facts and how to best communicate them, whether it be to the legislature or to the New Yorkers that we serve. And I'd say there's views in every direction. I participate in a hearing every year before the legislature, representing the governor's executive budget. And on the one hand, of course, we hear that we're not going fast enough and that we need to do more, and we're not addressing the threat of climate change in as significant a way as we should. On the other hand, certainly we hear that we are deploying resources that may have issues from a feasibility perspective, a cost perspective, et cetera. And so in the middle of all of that is where we sit, in the sense that we do just what I said. We look at these issues objectively, and our job is to make an assessment as relates to resources, solutions, policies, programs that on balance are viewed and are proven to be the most effective solutions that we can deploy. But at the heart of the matter is technology, is markets. And it is true that we are working to change, in a lot of instances, the technologies that are being used, or perhaps to expand the deployment of technologies that are already used, but not at the scale we believe them to need to be. So it is an interesting world to work within, because in part, of course, it's change. It's a question related more to social science or psychology than it is to technology and solutions. But all of that to say, it is my strong belief, and certainly NYSERDA's imperative, to improve the quality of life for New Yorkers. And in part, it's because we've got solutions that can do just that. What was I was just talking to someone about their programmable thermostat. It's improving their quality of life. The home is it's at the temperature they want it to be, when they want it to be, that temperature, and they are reducing their energy bills because they're able to not heat the home to the same degree when they're not home. So like, that's a great example of a technology solution that is also a market solution, is also an economic solution, and a quality of life solution. So that's our middle ground, and we work hard to stay there for the very reasons of our mission.
Yeah, it's science and engineering, and physics doesn't lie. Physics doesn't change,
Indeed.
right?
Indeed.
We can innovate, but it does force you to be kind of creative in some ways, which is interesting too. A couple of quick things, and then I want to get some advice from you for women. But New York State has been tapping the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act, and did so obviously under President Biden and Vice President Harris. So, what types of projects are still going on from that, and how are they doing in the face of the new administration's revolt against those pieces of legislation and those funding opportunities and financial incentives?
Well, we actually had looked very carefully at the impact of the, as I called it at the time, the trifecta of.
I do too, yeah.
Oh, do you? Yeah. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. It was a game changer with respect to the ways in which we could leverage those, not only the funds, but ultimately the market growth that would result, and the tax credits within, particularly the Inflation Reduction Act. It was a big deal. Tens of billions of dollars of savings that we had anticipated could come our way. So we made very quick work in New York State of not only updating our assessment from a planning perspective, but also leveraging the funding. We competed for and won a number of different initiative programs, and really set out to get those programs in market as quickly as possible. And I'd say that's one thing that New York really brought to bear during the Biden administration, is the ability to deploy. Spending money takes time, but because we have the institution that is NYSERDA, and many of the programs that we have, and certainly the very highly skilled staff that we have, we were able to get programs in market faster than many states. In fact, we were the first to offer the first phase of the Inflation Reduction Act's what's known as home electrification and appliance rebates program. And that was an announcement that Secretary Granholm had made, another one of your podcast participants, right? But also to offer retail point of sale rebates for appliances. And so that program is on the street as we speak. It's literally allowing us to reach thousands of additional households and work in a way that's very streamlined with retailers to have point of sale rebates for, in this case, heat pump clothes dryers. All that to say, of course, this is relevant. We're monitoring the federal actions that are occurring on a regular basis, and that have the potential to impact our work. I'd say it's too soon to determine how this will play out in a specific way, but we are obviously continuing to work with our colleagues across state government to maximize the benefits of our policy. Make no mistake about it, New York is moving forward. Governor Hochul has made clear that this transition is underway and that she's strongly supportive of it. So it's really not changing a lot relative to our overall mission, but rather the sort of adder, if you will, that the federal leverage had provided.
Yeah, I hear that. It's interesting. This is a time when, as I said in the beginning, states as laboratories is really critical. I mean, you're really leaders now too, because so much action is happening that's progressing forward and at the state level, despite the noise that happens down the street from me since I live in the DC area. So yeah, it's may you live in interesting times, right?
We
Um,
do. I'd say though, it also is the case. It's not just about the challenges. It's also the opportunities. I had mentioned splitting the atom. I'll just tell you, if I
oh,
can, that we are
sure.
also very much advancing. The heart of NYSERDA is also the topic of innovation and really looking at the technologies that we need to be advancing that will necessarily be part of this zero emission electric grid in the future as a great example. And so we see areas of very strong alignment with the Trump administration on certain technologies that we expect will be complementary to renewables. We know we're going to need tens of gigawatts of dispatchable emissions-free resources. So we, of course, are looking at advanced geothermal technologies, hydrogen, but also advanced nuclear technologies through a master plan that the governor also announced in her State of the State. All that to say, it is universally true that we have certainly a need across the United States to invest in our electric grid. And there's a lot of technologies where we see strong overlap as well. So that's certainly something that we will continue to pursue.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. I've done a lot on geothermal, by the way, so you might enjoy some of that. I was in Iceland for a
Oh,
couple of times too, and they're the rocket ship on that one, right? But one of the
yes.
most important, yeah, totally. One of the most important programs in the Inflation Reduction Act and infrastructure bill to a lot of families, I think, is the electric school bus
Mm.
funding and incentives. It's now under threat, if not frozen. And of course, we have the lawsuits and the ping pong of that. We'll see where that lands. But I understand from your team that electric school buses are important to you and the state anyway. So, how is that rollout going? I saw some additional investment from the governor as well in that in her budget. But how's the rollout going? And more importantly, how is it being paid for? But how are parents and kids, as well as schools, responding to that? What do they think?
Yes, this has been a really interesting new work stream for NYSERDA over the past couple of years in the sense that New York has a requirement by 2027 that all new school buses sold will be zero emission. And by 2035, the state is aiming to convert its entire school bus fleet to the zero emission technologies. Now, there are a few different options, but the most significant mass market available technology is electric school buses. So that's really where we're focusing our attention. And in fact, the Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act actually allocated $500 million to support this transition. And that is a fund that we at NYSERDA are deploying as we speak. And so I'd say that this is a perfect example of how NYSERDA functions in the market, because on the one hand, we're deploying a grant program to essentially pay for the differential between a diesel bus and electric bus, as well as the charging infrastructure necessary to interconnect that bus and to charge it. That's really only a piece of the question, though, because what is also needed, and I think what is perhaps more important, is that we are working directly with the school districts, 731 school districts in
Wow.
the state of New York, to not only educate them. This is, as I said, it is a change. So we need to make sure all of these school districts have the tools and resources necessary to understand not only the technology, but the transition, which will be over many years. And as such, we're also funding plans, fleet electrification plans for these school districts to help them understand how over a series of many years they can begin to transition their fleet, to install the charging infrastructure, but I think importantly also plan the bus routes. You mentioned New York is a diverse state geographically. It's also a diverse state from a weather perspective. It gets very, very cold in parts of the state, of course, a lot of snow, longer bus routes, etc. So we need to help the school districts not only get some school buses in their fleet and begin to use them and learn by doing, and get a couple routes identified that can be their first routes to do so, but also to plan for an orderly transition over time. And so this is work that's underway. I would say it remains an area of focus of ours from an education perspective. You mentioned, what do families think about the technology? Look, I think every parent would say they would prefer their child to be on a bus where they're not inhaling diesel fumes, where a bus driver can actually hear the students because the bus is quiet. But there are questions, right? We've got to be, as I said, objective and clear-eyed. There are questions about the range. There's questions about the cost. There's questions about safety, all of which we are working directly with the school districts and the public at large to address.
Well, that's great. And I hope they get seatbelts too, for that matter.
Oh, of course. Of course.
Yeah. I did take, well, I've seen so many school buses without them, it kind of blows my mind. I took the bus when I wasn't close enough to walk. I did take the bus to school when I lived in New York. So
yes,
it was a bit ago, however, it was a bit ago. Before I get to career advice for women, what advice would you give to other state leaders? Maybe they're in a role like yours, running an energy innovation authority or agency, but maybe they're just in another kind of state role. So what advice would you give to them in managing this transition at this moment with the dynamics that are going on now, both not just politically, but also climate? And as well as the need to do, as you say, provide affordable, reliable power to everybody, literally everybody.
Well, I wouldn't say I have all of the answers, but over, as you had said, my 15 years here, I have been able to see what this transition really looks like in practice. And I think the foundation of this is that we need to be solving for many variables at the same time. As you had said, there's a lot of metrics of success that we are working toward. It isn't just about greenhouse gas emissions or cost or reliability or benefits coming to our state. It's all of those things at the same time. So what we really need are leaders who can be nimble, who are understanding the landscape that we're working within. You've got to keep your head up. Every day is a new twist or turn that will be coming our way. But the states, to your point, I've attended COP a couple of times, and we're called the subnationals. I like it. The subnationals are the way that we are able to incubate and to effectuate the private sector shifts that we see happening every day. And that is the foundation of all of this. I'm sure, I don't know if she said it in your interview with her, but Secretary Granholm had the best phrase, which was, it is private sector led, government enabled. And that is the key. We are a piece of this. We are looking to move markets in a direction that can improve not only quality of life, but the very metrics that we're solving against that you had asked me about. And when you look at it over a series of years, and in my case, decades, you can see that pace accelerating and the market momentum taking off. And that is very much what we are working to effectuate at an ever increasing pace for the very reasons you laid out.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I also interviewed Vanessa Chan, Dr. Vanessa Chan, who was Chief Commercialization Officer under Secretary Granholm, and she repeated the same phrase over and over again, to the point where I had her on a panel. I emceed a big summit for the private sector a couple months ago, and she was there, and I could almost parrot her words. I've heard it so many times now. Um,
I like it too.
yes, and no,
Good
it
point.
makes sense, right? It's understandable for people, right? And it gets to the core. I mean, that is what's happening now. Is kind of what I was referring to before. Is the markets are doing this, right? The if the government is the state governments can enable it, but if the feds are not going to enable it in the same level, for a while anyway, that's not going to stop the market. It's not going to
No.
stop Mother Nature. It's not going to stop the need for energy to everybody. It doesn't stop any other forces. It just says, okay, that's another dynamic we got to deal with, right?
It's totally true. And I that's why we have to remember where the market is. I had looked, I don't know, a week or two ago, and I was looking at the solar deployment as an example. It was literally 80% of additions of capacity in the first 6 months of 2024. So the answer is not anything other than this is like, it's happening. It's happening. This is the market that we are dealing with. And we need to continue the growth of all of these technologies so that we can test them, right? Are they ready for deployment at scale? If they're not, what do we need to do to continue to test against it? But ultimately, these markets are taking off in ways that I think are irreversible.
Yeah, and Secretary Granholm said the same thing. She said it's irrevocable. Um, it's like investing. You need a diversity. You need a
Mm-hmm.
diverse portfolio, right? Because everything has its assets and liabilities, and everything has its um, use case. Because this country is, I mean, I've lived in 8 states and
Mm-hmm.
traveled to almost all of them. And every region of this country is like a different country in some ways,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's weather, economic needs, whatever, right? Cultural style. And that it matters. I mean, I've lived in extreme hot, extreme cold, and the mid-Atlantic, which is smack in the middle of that. And they all have their own dynamics and their own needs. So you need to have a diverse portfolio for sure.
Yes, that's
Well, I
something
could talk.
I'm very excited about well, you're probably going to ask me about this, but that's why I love this job is because the diversity of resources that are coming forward from the private sector are just amazing, absolutely amazing to really interrogate and deploy.
Oh, for sure. It makes it that's what I love about this work, Doreen,
Mm-hmm.
is it's fascinating. It's
Yes,
just bloody fascinating.
it is.
And I get to talk to cool people like you. So it's really, and that's why we're doing the summit too. The Earth Day Women Summit is because we want to highlight the innovative ideas that women in particular are bringing to the table because women address situations differently, whatever it is, but especially climate and energy solutions. So thank you for what you do every day. But before I let you go, I could talk to you for about 8 hours, but before I let you go, I like to get career advice for
Mm.
mid-career women. So think about a woman who has at least 10, maybe 15 years of experience, has an education, knows what she's good at. She wants to excel and make money, but she also wants to make a difference, right? And doesn't feel that it should be a trade off. So,
Mhm.
what advice would you give to her?
I'm always glad to discuss this. You mentioned in the intro that I'm an ambassador for the C3E and DOE initiative, and it was such an honor to be appointed by Secretary Granholm in that role. In part because of the very reason that you're describing. That apparently I'm no longer mid-career, which is a sad.
Wait. I say I'll be mid career until I'm 6 feet under because I'm
There we
always
go.
looking at the next big thing. So,
I'm glad I'll be mid-career with you. But all that to say, when I think about myself, when I came to NYSERDA in 2010, I definitely was mid-career at that point. And really I came to NYSERDA because I knew that I could have the biggest impact of my career in working at this organization and working in the public sector. but also in taking my brain, my engineer's brain, right, and putting it to practice in advancing technologies and solutions that, as I said, foundationally improve the quality of life of at least our residents and many more beyond. So all that to say, I'm asked this because I'm actually the first president of NYSERDA who came from the organization, was promoted up into this role in theory and ultimately appointed, of course, by our board and the governor. But all that to say, how does that happen? It happens, I think, in the most simplest of senses, because I said yes. And I asked to do things that maybe others weren't bold enough to say. I identified needs. I put myself in positions of exposure and ultimately was successful in delivering on them. I think women underestimate, we are more likely to let someone else speak up and to take on new responsibilities, whatever they may be, or to say, I can address this challenge. In my case, I think I was able to say so. And of course, I worked at an organization that encouraged me to do so. And in doing so, not only did I build a portfolio that is a game changer for the state of New York, but ultimately it allowed me to be exposed to other things, to areas outside of our organization, to stakeholders, to experts, to everyone under the sun, from investors to researchers, et cetera. And that not only broadened my aperture of view, but also my exposure to what could be possible for my own career. And I say this because it really all starts by being confident in your ability to deliver and to be able to say so. And that's something we actually just talked about at a C3E event, was just that. Literally, it all starts with raising your hand and feeling confident in your abilities. So I'm super proud of not only where I am, but the fact that I get to do this job and really bring others forward for those same opportunities. I've made very clear NYSERDA's commitment to DEI in all instances, but also I have a soft spot for a mid-career woman, especially one who's maybe been working on raising family for a while and getting themselves back into the workforce. Like that's also a very special place for me to be working, given my own background as well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and it's so important, and C3E does great stuff. The I loved what you said about speaking up. It's funny because I'm always the one who speaks up when other people don't. And when people say when I see people kind of surprised that I'm, or whatever, that I'm the one that's going, well, let me just say this bluntly, and politely, but I always say, well, I'm a New Yorker.
Yeah, I'm from upstate, though. It's different. It's different.
It's true. I don't know, but Senator Gillibrand is no shrinking violet. So
that's true. That's true.
Not everybody upstate is that way too. Well, you've been terrific, Doreen. Any final thoughts before I let you get back to solving New York's energy challenges?
Look, I'm so appreciative, Joan, of the opportunity to speak today. But the long and short of it is, I think it's a fantastic moment to celebrate not only my organization and the impact we've had over 50 years, but literally as we speak, we're planning for the coming 50 years. And I think it's an honor not only to lead NYSERDA and to continue its commitment to objectivity and impact, but foundationally to do so in a manner that has really, really a huge series of successes that we're going to be touting. So be on the lookout. It's going to be quite the year of celebrating NYSERDA. So appreciative of the opportunity and the interest in hearing from New York State.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm excited. And when I'm up and coming up to your neck of the woods, I'll let you know, maybe get a tour of some of those atomic splitting places, and we'll see what we can do. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on Electric Ladies Podcast. Doreen Harris, President and CEO of the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, also known as NYSERDA. It's a mouthful, but I like NYSERDA better. So, what do you want to see state leaders do to transition to a clean energy economy? Post it to us on Twitter and Threads at Joan Michelson. Send us any questions there as well. You may win a complimentary 30-minute coaching session with me. And please subscribe to our mailing list to stay abreast of our amazing guests like Doreen Harris, our articles, and career advice. And please sign up to come to the Earth Day Women's Summit in April. You can subscribe to all of the above on our website at electricladiespodcast.com. I'm Joan Michelson. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.